There's a lot of thinking around student workloads and workload model and what happens when we shove in lots of great ideas into our curriculum in terms of assessment, what that actually means from a student point of view. So Katherine, I'll pass over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Is the sound okay?
Sound is perfect, yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to blame Michael first of all for writing the title of my talk. So for those of you who have not yet met, I'm Dr. Katherine Haxton. I'm a senior lecturer in chemistry in the School of Chemical and Physical Sciences at Keele University. I was for 4 years the programme director at Keele, and at the moment I'm the senior personal tutor for the school. So the first step in developing a student support plan, if I can get this to advance for me, support your staff properly. None of us are going to get anything done this coming academic year while staff are feeling overloaded, anxious, and a bit fearful about what they're being asked to do. It's going to translate in the classroom. We already know it does. If we remember back to the first classes we taught, when we were a lot more anxious about delivering taught sessions, it translated in our classes. Maybe it was a nervous energy that made us all seem a little bit more manic, but it will have an impact. So make sure staff are supported properly in the coming academic year. So student support, and this slide is deliberately chaotic. I'm just going to shift this window, that helps. Student support, our student support ecosystem at universities is an incredibly complex mixture of things. So we've got the student at the heart of it. We've got the academic support that we're providing through teaching staff, perhaps your institutions have module leaders, course directors, program directors, and there's also the support staff. We've got the technical staff, our administrators, and support staff right the way through to our cleaners, because it's often the cleaners in the accommodation that perform that first welfare check on a lot of our students. Students are often given a personal tutor. It has other names: academic mentor, study support tutor, and our students may come to us with specific needs support. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about that if a student has specific learning difficulties, mental health issues, or other health issues, because that tends to be quite well established. And I know, at least at Keele, the teams involved in that are working pretty hard right now to translate their activity into something that's going to fit what we're doing in the next semester. Our students also have a big support network that's nothing to do with university. So they've got their families and their friends. They've got the peer group within which they sit, and obviously some of the chat this morning already is focused on how do we integrate students into that peer network. And there's all the other aspects. So there's the societies they join in with, there's their social life, there's their personal life. There's also things like their cultural perspective and their religion and beliefs. There is a challenge if our commuter students are working at home and they live in multi-generational households. There are some topics that will be really challenging and potentially quite embarrassing for them to sit in the corner of their living room on a family PC learning about. And we might think in chemistry or physical sciences that we duck those topics. I know forensic science is well aware that some of their topics can maybe make people a little squeamish. But if we think about maybe a discussion about the structure of steroids in chemistry, that might lead to a discussion of birth control pills. That could cause some conflict to our students when they're doing more learning at home. We cannot assume our students have privacy. Other aspects of student support, like finance and careers, again, are pretty well established. So student support is amazingly complex, and it's just going to get more complicated this year. So if we look at some of the aspects that can lead to students being less successful, the coloured boxes other than the gold here are adapted from a paper, and I've added the 2 gold ones. And this was a study that looked at something called study-related burnout in our students. It was on a paper on academic workload. So it considered things like the teaching and learning environment and the need for a proper workload. It included other factors that Christy's already talked a bit about this morning, the motivation of our students, what they hope to achieve. They also linked in our students' philosophy of life, which isn't really something we like to consider as physical sciences. And it linked it all into what happens for study-related burnout. And one of the symptoms of study-related burnout is sort of dropping out of engagement and starting to be quite cynical. Now, I know I recognise some of the literature on burnout from my own experiences of just teaching across a normal semester. I'm really cynical by week 12, and I know those of you who know me will think I'm really cynical anyway, but there you go. I've added in students' personal circumstances because I do think students' ideas of what an achievement is often a different depending on their personal circumstances, and their motivations may be different. And I think what we have to consider in our pandemic preparedness world is that there's life-related burnout. And this is something that disabled staff and students are well accustomed to dealing with. The overwhelming act for a person with a disability really is that they have a whole ton of life-related administration that people without a disability just don't have to do. So study-related burnout, life-related burnout, and that could be around managing illness, could be about caring responsibilities. So I think that's a really important thing to recognise. And as Christy's pointed out, treating our students like individuals and getting to know them helps with this. So we're familiar with the idea of a workload model in the context of allocating academic staff time. And I'm not going to talk about that apart from to say that it's my belief that no workload model should allocate people to more than 80% of established hours. But for students, a workload model is a method of evaluating the time provided within and demanded by the curriculum for study. And it has to include a bit of a squidge factor, because not all students will be able to grasp things at the same time. We have crude workload models for our students in the form of 1 credit is, say, 10 hours of effort and other metrics like that. And we try to limit workload through things like word counts, exam length. But there's a few things that go on in our thinking that might disrupt this. So workload is impacted by institutional resources. So that's access to teachers to ask a question, how many orbits around the library you have to do to find a seat, whether you can access the learning resources rapidly and in a format that you can download or actually view. It depends on our contact time. It depends on what the expectations around independent study are. It depends on how much work people have to do and how long it takes them, the level of difficulty of that work, where we're putting any assessments, or we could say any submission. And obviously it relates to the basic student characteristics, their motivation, their effort, and some aspects of ability. So if we consider teaching over the last, well, I've been teaching at Keele for 12 years now. So let's say I was delivering a course on the truth about cats and dogs, which is acted out in my house on a daily basis. Back in 2010, I would have delivered 6 one-hour lectures on the topic. Cats, bigger cats, dogs, big dogs, and then some kind of comparison. So that would have been about 6 hours of contact and lectures mainly. And I'd probably have provided a problem sheet of exam-style questions for a bit of revision. So it would have been 6 hours plus independent study. Fast forward to 2017, and I would probably have taken on board a lot of the stuff around flipped learning. So maybe I turned my lectures into screencasts. Screencast 1 to 3, then maybe I'm using my contact time for problem classes. So I'm hoping to get a bit more durable learning and tackle some misconceptions. But suddenly, I've now got 6 hours of contact and 4.5 hours of pre-class activities. Now, on the module proposal forms that we do at Keele, and also in the key information sets that we're asked to compile about contact time, both of these models come across as the same. But one demands substantially more engagement by the students. We could argue that it cuts down on the independent study, but I would argue that it forcibly structures the independent study and forces the students to comply with it within a time frame of our choosing, not the students' choosing. Who knows what Model 3 for COVID is like, but I do know that our colleagues that are already operating Model 2 are at a slight advantage in already having their teaching materials recorded. So the concept we need to introduce is the idea of non-contact contact time. So that is our expectations on a weekly basis of students watching things that are a defined length of time. We also have to be aware of what will happen if we shift a lot of assessments from exams to term time. Our semesters are 12 weeks long. There's then a revision week and a 2-week assessment period, giving us 15 weeks to deliver essentially 600 hours of stuff, including all independent study. If all those exams shift into term time, we've got to do that 600 hours over 12 weeks. And I personally don't think we should be expecting more than 35 hours a week of our students. But if we try to do it all in 12, we'd be expecting 50-hour weeks. So my thinking for this coming semester, and again, the animal analogies kind of win in my house, is that I'd like everyone to pause for thought. I'd like people, when they're contemplating the sessions they will run, to have a really clearly defined purpose for the session. Firstly, that's to reassure the students that they're spending their time on something valuable. I'd then like people to really consider the accessibility issues. I've talked a bit about workload already, and I'm going to touch on engagement. And all of that has to be focused on success, but that's not just a grade on the page. There are so many other ways that we're going to have to measure success to keep our students motivated. So accessibility is going to be a major issue when we're talking about any kind of teaching. People might be aware of students in their class that need to lip read. If we're in an environment where there's a lot of people wearing masks, there's going to be a significant issue there. It is possible to buy masks with a transparent panel that can facilitate it, so that could be a reasonable adjustment. But in UK higher education, and I'm sure there's similar across the world, we have to make anticipatory reasonable adjustments. So if we're producing video materials, we have to consider subtitles, closed captioning, a transcript as Michael's producing today. But one thing that actually helps staff often is producing a script and then reading the script as you're producing the video material. You don't need to read it in unnatural detail. You can sort of use it as your guide points, but then you can provide that to the students. You need to provide alternative text on images, descriptions of material, and I know that's really challenging in some chemistry contexts, but we also need to consider how easy our stuff is to download. Is anyone taking notes during this session? I've tried a few webinars and things, and I've tried having the Zoom screen small and taking notes on a Word document. I've tried the good old pen and paper. With a lot of our students learning off computers, it's actually really, really hard to take notes. So I think there's a bigger case for providing full session notes or annotated notes. And then we need to address issues of accessibility around webcam and online etiquette. I will be banning the use of GIFs. We'll be teaching through Microsoft Teams because of issues around digital blackface, where Black people are overrepresented in GIFs that are used by white people, and it's a culturally insensitive behaviour. And I think the easiest thing to do is to ban GIFs. They're also hugely distracting in a comments box because they're often constantly animated, and it can distract people that are already struggling to focus on the material. I'm also aware that most universities are working on accessibility guidelines, but the key thing is to build it in from the start. When I'm talking about GIFs, I mean GIFs, not gifts as in presents. So the little animated videos people use on the internet. So I can see the chat box. So one of the studies I do, I should say I do research into student workload, but also student engagement. And this is from our Student Engagement and Success in Physical Sciences project. So this was a survey from 2019, and it was done to all second and third year chemistry and forensic science students. Now we've put in campus-wide lecture capture over the last 5 years, and the immediate call of the academics has been, my attendance has dropped off because my lecture is recorded. So I thought I'd ask the second and third years. So are you more or less likely to pay attention if the lecture is recorded? The majority of students were neutral. I think they're just being diplomatic. Are you more or less likely to attend if the classes were being recorded? Again, neutral. I mean, I would have liked, I think that's probably the best possible outcome. The final one was a little bit cheeky, but I was reading module feedback at the time that I was writing these questions. Are you more or less likely to attend if you like who's teaching the class? More likely. I'm not surprised by this, but at the same time, I think that has massive implications for staff delivering asynchronous stuff. we're going to have a lot of staff who are really technologically savvy, who are very, very comfortable in digital environments. They're going to offer a certain level of experience to our students. And we're going to have a lot of staff for whom the best that they are going to do because of their circumstances is a synchronous online lecture. And we have to think about how we manage the student expectations to make sure that the students don't continually demand more of staff who have other priorities such as research and things like that. So I thought I'd share these data with you because it's quite an interesting result. The overall CSIP questionnaire had about 95 different questions on it. So needless to say, I'm still analysing it. So engagement has a lot of definitions in the literature. The ones that strike me as being quite relevant is speaking about motivation. I think Christy's already helped us dispel the myth that our students are showing up to uni as prototypical academics who just want to learn for the sake of learning. And we have to consider the extrinsic motivation. So they must pass an exam, but I like extrinsic motivation framed around a number of F's. So fees, I want to succeed because I'm paying fees. My family expect me to get a degree. My future depends on my degree. I need to succeed because I'm afraid of failure. And there's a very small number each year for whom learning is actually fun. I'm personal tutor to one such student at the moment, and it's quite eye-opening. Situation around engagement is really important. Some of us just aren't social learners. The thought of doing some forms of social learning that are very popular, like TBL or some forms of peer problem-based learning, absolutely wretched in my world. Some people prefer solitary, but we're in a model where people are going to be forced into solitary learning who may not wish to. So is the situation people are learning in going to be supportive for them, or is it going to be distracting? I've already done video calls with students who are sitting in their living room and mum's in the corner watching Match of the Day on the TV. So how are they going to be able to engage with activities and give them full attention? Engagement can also be encouraged by enough structure in course. So are we going to send them weekly lists of do this? Here are all the tasks you must do this week. Some of our students really need that high structure to motivate them. It will tie into what they might be accustomed to from school. But for other students, particularly ones who for any reason miss a couple of weeks, perhaps they have to self-isolate, or perhaps they become ill. A high structure course means looking back over what you have to catch up on can be really, really daunting. But low structure has its perils as well. If we don't structure our students enough, there's going to be a sense that I don't really need to do anything because I'm just going to get a take-home test in January or May, and I can just look up stuff and I'll be fine. So structure is going to be really important around engagement. And then assessment. A few people do know I tend to rant, but formative assessment is not free. It's not something we can just plug into courses and expect students to have the time to do it. We should treat all forms of assessment the same in terms of how we allocate workload. So if you want students to submit a draft, that has to then come out of the time for the overall piece of coursework. So we have to moderate our expectations around assessments. If we're suddenly going to put in a whole lot of small items that have to be done weekly to demand that our students engage with things, we have to appreciate that there is workload attached to that. And then we have to consider more broadly, do we have just a few big items of assessment, or are we going to have lots of tiny little ones, and how that affects both engagement and our workload. Keeping an eye on the time. Bottom line though is most of the measurements of engagement that we're going to come up with, they're just flawed. If you count the number of times a video has been played, how do you know the students just can't work the video and they have to keep clicking it? The number of times a file is downloaded isn't necessarily representative of how many times a file is engaged with. So be aware of some learning analytics, particularly if you're using Blackboard as a virtual learning environment. Often they aren't telling you what you think they are. Success has to be about more than grades. So success in the coming academic year will be attending to most class activities and participating fully in most of them. And I'm saying most because everyone has bad days where they just need to stay under the duvet, and that's okay. 100% attendance is not something that I would ever want to promote. Success is making progress on skills and developing all the new skills necessary to thrive in the current academic environment. Back in the oldie days when I was at high school, I had an English teacher who simply said that when you submit work, or when you're standing waiting for an exam to start, you should be able to say, I could not reasonably have done more at this point in time to prepare for it or to make the work of a satisfactory standard. And I think we need to go back to that. I want my students to submit work they're proud of, not because they did it between 5 and 7 a.m. before a submission deadline of 10 a.m. And I want them to understand what reasonable means. I also want my students to have durable learning. So I don't want a situation where I lecture for 2 weeks, then I get an assessed problem sheet in a week later, and then they go, poof, done with that, don't need to know it anymore. I want my teaching to help students to clear up their conceptual understanding. I want them to think like a chemist in a better way. And I want them to have feedback to use for future improvement. And I want them to actually engage with the feedback. So I think a student support plan has to help us develop these aspects in our students. Finally, there's a nice blog post, a nice article on the Wonky blog about the expectation gap. And this is particularly true of students who have been participating in widening participation programs over a lot of their early lives. We all have a sense of what going to uni is like. We imagine the big lecture theatre. The elephant in the room is that is gone this year. I'm hoping the boots stay. We've brought students onto campus at ages 11, 13, 15. We've shown them the lecture theatres and said, imagine having a class in here. We've delivered outreach experiences in labs and environments that our incoming cohort just don't have. The elephant in the room is the expectation gap. We have to address it. We can't just avoid it awkwardly and hope it goes away. Our students are going to be disappointed that they're not going to get some things. Hopefully they're going to get an equal experience in another sense. But I think we need to at least be honest with our students that they're going to be a bit disappointed and we're going to be a bit disappointed, but that's all okay and we'll just all make the most of it. Okay, any questions? I can take them now or later through Twitter or through the chat.
Thank you, Katherine, that was amazing. I think it really just summarised beautifully and surveyed fantastically the kind of considerations and issues associated with workload, but also getting students to, or getting staff to think about students in their particular situation, but also I just love the opening gambit of staff and thinking about staff and the issues associated with staff and their different technological expertise. I'll let you just take a moment to read through the chat questions if there are any questions appearing. I suppose I had an opening gambit question, which was that issue about different staff. So if I think across the spectrum of my colleagues, we've got Siri on one end who'll have every interactive widget and every PowerPoint slide going, you know, it'll be completely overcrammed with nonsense. And then at the other end, there'll be the staff member who essentially had the PowerPoint slides and so on. I mean, what the line we're sort of going to pull is variety is there in the normal situation. Do you think that will cut mustard in this online world? Or I understand this threat that we'll have to keep pushing more and more in the online teaching. Do you think if we just use the variety line, will that work?
We won't know until we try. I mean, what I see anecdotally in module feedback is that when one member of staff has a distinctly different style to the bulk of a teaching team in a year group, it is highlighted by the students. They, like most groups of people, they're acutely aware of differences. And I guess a bit intrigued as to why some people are a bit different to others, and it affects teaching styles just as much. I think what's important is not to go in all guns blazing and telling students, yeah, it's going to be great, expect this bit of interactivity, that bit of interactivity. There's something to be said for surprising people. But it's expectation management on all parts.
I have a follow-up, but Patrick's asking there in the chat, what do we actually do to foster good habits in students? So ideas of slide, come to class in Freshers Week, or conflicting, this is critical. Not sure.
Yeah,
You can come on the voice if you like. I'm just not sure what you mean with that last point. But Katherine, do you want to take that?
I think my experience of trying to foster good habits in the students, it's been met with claims that we're being condescending, that it's pointless because they learned all these skills at school or high school or at college, sorry. So I think we have to be very, very cautious about overtly shoving stuff in to say, this is how you take notes, this is good habits. We kind of want our students to learn what works for them rather than just taking a prescribed method. I like that Christy finds that they learn study habits in school or college different. I think one of the biggest problems we always have is students get turned off if they think they've covered something before.
Mm.
So when we start back with models of bonding at the start of first year, a lot of students who've performed quite strongly at A level, they tend to go, oh, I don't need to pay attention to this, I know this. The same is true for study habits. I had a method that worked, I'll just try it again. And they don't confront it till they fail. So yeah, Patrick's suggesting they don't teach study skills until the first test results are out. And that actually looks like a really good strategy.
Yeah, Sandra McGuire has written a book on this. Essentially says the same thing. She says there's no point in students need to do badly in that first go to know that actually my previous methods don't work, or you know, that sense of you need to be approaching it in a real context rather than this sort of aspirational idea about what study is.
Yeah.
So I just have David's comment here. Yeah, so in the foundation year setting, they're sort of working on it, and then the students go on into first year. So Carl was asking how long till the first test. I think in Sandra McGuire's case, it was about 4 or 5 weeks in, but
I think that's a good point to put it, if it's on stuff they've learned in that 4 or 5 weeks, because it's early enough in most semesters to still correct the course. If it's the January exams, then
yeah.
I mean, the data I've looked at when we had first semester and second semester exams, the students who failed the January exam failed the May exam and repeated the year.
All right, I will dig out that Sandra McGuire paper. Actually, that's quite a nice one to link in. But I'll let you follow up any further questions in the chat, Katherine. But thank you. That was really
Thank
really
you.
cool. And I think it has been recorded, and I have a feeling it's going to be recording. I come back to several times. So thank you very much. And I'll just